Thanks for watching. Follow a brighter destiny for more powerful stories, and don't forget to subscribe.
Sir, you've left the exact same $10 bill on that table every single morning for 311 days. The young waitress held the crisp note up to the light like she was checking it for a watermark that wasn't there. I have to ask you something, and I need a real answer this time. Why $10? Not 9, not 11, always 10. The tall man in the charcoal overcoat looked at her for a long moment. The kind of silence that has weight to it, the kind you could set a coffee cup down on. Then he did what he always did. He smiled, just barely, picked up his mug, and started walking toward the door. He stopped with one hand on the brass handle. "One day, Claire," he said without turning around, "I'll tell you everything." And then the bell above the door chimed once, sharp and small, and he was gone into the gray Chicago morning. She never could have guessed that the answer to that question had been sitting quietly across from her for almost a year, wearing a $2,000 suit and drinking $3 coffee, waiting for the right moment to become the rest of her life. Claire Whitmore had been pouring coffee at the Blue Spoon Diner on West Addison Street for 1 year and 11 months. She was 24 years old, and she was living 2 lives that most people would have said didn't belong in the same body. By 6 in the morning, she was tying on an apron stained faintly with syrup that never fully washed out. By 7 at night, 3 days a week, she was in a lecture hall at Rush University, taking notes on cardiac rhythms until her hand cramped. She wanted to be a pediatric nurse. She had wanted it since she was 9 years old and had spent 4 days in a hospital bed with a burst appendix, and a nurse named Dolores had stayed 40 minutes past the end of her shift just to make sure Claire fell asleep before she left. Claire never forgot that. Some debts you don't pay back to the person who gave them to you. You pay them forward to somebody else entirely. The diner opened at 6:30. The man arrived at 7:12. Not 7, not 7:15. 7:12 on a clock that Claire had started checking without meaning to. His name, according to the black card he'd left behind once by accident, and she'd quietly returned to him, folded in a napkin, was Nathaniel Weston. He wore dark tailored coats that fit him the way expensive things fit people who never had to think about money, and yet he never once acted like a man who had money. He ordered black coffee. He ordered 2 eggs over easy and rye toast, dry, no butter on the side, butter already on it, please. He said please to a 24-year-old waitress, the same way he might have said it to a senator. He read a physical newspaper, the actual paper kind, folded into thirds, and he never once looked at his phone at the table. And every morning, 20 minutes after he sat down, he left. A $10 bill, crisp, corners, sharp enough to almost cut, tucked under the edge of his saucer. At first, Claire thought it was simply generosity. Chicago had plenty of men in good coats who tipped well and disappeared. But after the 40th morning, after the 100th, after the day, she realized she could set her lunch break by the sound of the bell above the door at exactly 7:12. She started to notice something odd. It was never $9 on a slow week or 12 on a good one. It was 10 every day, rain, snow, the Tuesday in March, when the whole block lost power for 4 hours. $10, same bill, same fold, same spot under the saucer. "He's here, Hon," said Denise. A waitress who'd worked the counter at the Blue Spoon for going on 11 years and had opinions about everything. Your favorite customer just walked in. Claire rolled her eyes without looking up from the coffee pot she was filling. He's not my favorite. Then why do you always smile like that the second the bell rings? I smile at all my customers, Denise. It's called customer service. Denise snorted so loud a man 3 booths down looked up from his eggs. Not like that, you don't. Claire didn't get the chance to argue, because right on schedule, the bell chimed and Nathaniel Weston walked in, wearing a navy coat with the collar still damp from a rain that had started 20 minutes earlier. He settled into the same booth by the window, the one with a slight wobble in the left leg that Claire had fixed herself with a folded coaster 8 months ago, and unfolded his newspaper the way he always did. She was already there with the coffee before he could ask. You remembered, he said. He said it every time, and every time it sounded a little like he meant it. You've ordered the exact same thing for almost a year, she said, sliding the mug across the table. I'd be a pretty terrible waitress if I hadn't picked up on that by now. He laughed, a short, low sound, like he wasn't used to using it and was a little rusty. Fair point. Busy day ahead? He looked out the window at the rain coming sideways off Addison Street. The usual, he said. Meetings, phone calls. Too many emails from people who could have just walked down the hall and talked to me. Sounds exhausting. It is. He turned back to her, and there was something almost boyish in the way he tilted his head. So why do you think I come here first? Before any of it. Claire glanced around the diner, at the cracked red vinyl booths, and the ceiling fan that had wobbled since before she started, at the smell of bacon grease that never fully left the walls, no matter how many times they scrubbed them. I genuinely don't know, she said. But I'd love a theory. It's quiet here, he said. It's honest. Nobody in this room wants anything from me, except a good breakfast and maybe a decent tip. For a second, neither of them said anything, and the silence sat between them comfortably. The way silence does between two people who aren't in a hurry to fill it. Somewhere behind the counter, a bell rang for an order that was up, and the moment folded itself closed. I should get back to it, Claire said. Denise thinks I'm slacking. Denise is right, he said, and smiled again, wider this time. When he left 20 minutes later, he set his payment on the table, and then, carefully, deliberately, like it was a small ceremony rather than a habit, he laid down a crisp $10 bill beside the receipt. Have a good one, Claire. You too, Mr. Weston. She watched him go, then picked up the bill between 2 fingers, exactly $10, exactly like every other morning, and folded it into her apron pocket. One day, she said quietly, to no one, I'm going to find out why. The weeks folded into each other the way Chicago weeks do in early spring, gray turning slowly to something almost like warmth. Their mornings became something Claire didn't examine too closely, a rhythm she simply lived inside of. Good morning, Mr. Weston, she'd say, setting the coffee down before he'd even fully sat. Good morning, Claire. How's the anatomy class going? She looked up, genuinely startled the first time he asked. You remembered I had an exam. You mentioned it 11 days ago, he said. Like it was nothing. Like most people didn't carry around that kind of detail about a waitress's life. I've been wondering how you did. I passed, she said, unable to keep the pride out of her voice. 91. I knew you would. You don't know that. You've never seen me study. I've seen you work a 9-hour shift on your feet and then pull out a textbook the size of a phone book during your 15-minute break, he said. I don't need to see you study. People who do that don't fail exams. His words followed her for the rest of the shift, tucked somewhere behind her sternum, warm in a way she wasn't quite ready to name. The breakfast rush came and went. Claire helped an elderly man named Frank carry his tray to a table because his hands shook too much to manage it alone. She crouched down to eye level with a 6-year-old boy who couldn't decide between pancakes and waffles and gently talked him through both options like the decision mattered as much as he thought it did. She smiled at every single person who walked through that door, not because a manager had told her to, not because a customer satisfaction score depended on it, but because it was simply the shape of who she was. Nathaniel noticed. He always noticed. When he stood to leave, he said, "Good luck with class tonight." "Thank you. Don't stay up too late studying." "I make no promises," she said, and he laughed again, that same rusty low sound. He left the $10, same as always, and walked out into a city that was slowly warming under a sky the color of wet concrete. "She still don't understand you, Mr. Weston," she murmured to the empty booth. "But I'm starting to think there's a story behind that money." 6 weeks later, on a Tuesday that started unusually slow, with only 4 booths occupied by 8:30, Claire had a rare 5 minutes to breathe. She was refilling Nathaniel's coffee when he glanced down and noticed the corner of a thick, dog-eared textbook poking out from under the counter. "Pathophysiology?" he asked, reading the spine upside down. "Final exams are 3 weeks out," she said. "Nervous?" "A little," she admitted, and then, because something about the quiet diner and the rain outside made her honest, more than a little. "There's so much to remember. Some nights I sit there and I genuinely wonder if any of it is sinking in." He was quiet for a moment, studying her the way he studied his newspaper, careful and unhurried. "From everything I've seen," he said finally, "you don't do anything halfway. Not the coffee. Not the way you talk to that little boy who can't pick between pancakes and waffles. Not the way you carried Frank's tray without making him feel like he needed help. I think you're going to be just fine." She felt heat rise in her face, unexpected and a little embarrassing. "You really know how to make a person feel better." "I only say true things," he said simply. The cook called her name from the pass-through window, and she started to move, then turned back. "Thank you, by the way." "For what?" "For believing in me before you had any real reason to." He looked at her for a long second. "Sometimes," he said, "all a person needs is someone who believes they can do the thing before they've proven it yet." When he left that morning, the $10 bill sat under the saucer, same as it had 209 times before, and Claire found herself smiling at it in a way that had nothing to do with money at all. The last of February brought the kind of storm Chicago is famous for, the kind that shuts down half the Red Line and turns Addison Street into a gray, churning river of slush. Claire trudged to the diner at 6 that morning, through snow that came up past her ankles, certain that today, of all days, the booth by the window would sit empty. At 7:12, the bell rang. Nathaniel walked in with snow melting off the shoulders of his coat, his dress shoes soaked clear through, his hair damp and pushed back from his forehead. Denise, refilling ketchup bottles behind the counter, actually laughed out loud. "You walked here in this?" Claire asked, already pouring his coffee before he'd even reached the booth. "My driver couldn't get the car up, Addison," he said, sliding into his seat. "So I walked the last 6 blocks. You could have just skipped breakfast for one morning. Nobody would have blamed you." He looked up at her, snow still melting in his eyebrows, and something in his expression was almost embarrassed, almost shy, in a way she'd never seen on him before. "I didn't want to skip it," he said simply. "Mm-mm." She didn't press further, but she carried that answer with her for the rest of the day, turning it over the way you turn over a stone you found on a beach, trying to understand what made it worth picking up in the first place. He ate slower than usual that morning. The diner was nearly empty. Most of the regulars kept home by the storm, and for the first time in almost a year, there was no rush pulling Claire away from the table every few minutes. "Can I ask you something?" she said, refilling his cup for the second time. "Always. Do you ever get tired of eating alone? Every morning, same booth, same order. It just seems like a lonely way to start the day for a man with your kind of life." He considered the question longer than she expected. "I used to," he admitted, "before I found this place." He glanced around at the fogged-up windows, the hiss of the grill, the smell of coffee that had been burning slightly since 6:30. Now it doesn't feel lonely at all. Outside, the snow kept falling, thick and silent, the kind of snowfall that seems to swallow every other sound in the city along with it. For a moment, neither of them spoke, and the quiet between them felt less like an absence and more like something being built. One small morning at a time. The way you lay brick after brick without noticing the wall taking shape until you step back and realize it's a house. When he finally stood to leave, he pulled his damp coat tighter and set down the $10 bill, same as always, same fold, same spot beneath the saucer. "Get home safe," he told her. "You too, Mr. Weston. Try not to walk through a blizzard next time." "No promises," he said. And for the second time since she'd known him, she watched him laugh all the way out the door. The following Thursday, Nathaniel walked in, looking tired in a way Claire hadn't seen before. Faint shadows under his eyes, his tie slightly crooked. "You look tired today," she said, setting down his coffee. "I was up until 1 a.m, he said. "Working?" He hesitated. "Studying, actually. Something I picked up recently. That was new information," and Claire filed it away without comment. "I thought you had people for that kind of thing." "I do," he said. "I still like to understand what I'm signing off on." "That's a smart way to run things." He looked at her, something warm passing behind his eyes. "It's the same reason you're up at 1 a.m. with a textbook. People who understand the work usually end up being good at it." Claire rested one hand lightly on the edge of the table. "I just hope all this studying actually pays off in the end." "It will," he said with a certainty that startled her. "What makes you so sure?" "Because every single morning I walk through that door," he said, "you're already smiling before the place even opens for the day. Then you work a full shift on your feet for 9 hours. And after that, you go sit in a classroom and study cardiac rhythms until your hand cramps." He paused. People with that kind of engine in them usually get where they're going. "You always know exactly the right thing to say." "I've had a few good teachers," he said, and something in his voice made her think, not for the first time, that there was a whole life behind this quiet man that she knew almost nothing about. A regular customer called her name from 2 booths over. As she turned to go, Nathaniel said her name, "Claire." She turned back. When you become a nurse, he said. She smiled. You mean if? He shook his head, slow and certain. When? Neither of them said anything else for a moment. Something about the confidence in his voice settled into her chest and stayed there. I'll hold you to that, she said softly, and went back to work. 20 minutes later, he left his payment, and beside it, carefully placed, the $10 bill. Have a good one, Claire. You, too, Mr. Weston. She watched him disappear through the glass door into a Chicago morning that felt, for reasons she couldn't fully explain, a little brighter than the one before it. The next morning, Claire glanced at the clock above the pass-through window. 7:10. She poured fresh coffee into the pot, wiped down the counter, and waited. 7:15 came and went. By 7:25, his booth by the window was still empty. And Claire told herself, firmly, that it didn't matter, that businessmen had meetings, that a person could be 5 minutes late for 100 different reasons that had nothing to do with her. Waiting on somebody? Denise asked, sliding past with a tray of dirty plates. I was just wondering if he's all right, Claire said too quickly. I'm sure he's fine, honey. Rich men are busy men, I know that. Still, every time the bell rang, her eyes went to the door before she could stop them. At 7:41, the bell rang one more time, and there he was, hair slightly damp, tie loosened, moving fast for a man who usually seemed to have all the time in the world. I'm so sorry, he said, before he'd even fully sat down. A meeting ran 40 minutes over. I should have called. Relief moved through her so fast and so plainly that she couldn't hide it in time. I was starting to think something happened to you. He looked at her, something soft crossing his face. You noticed I was late. Your table looked lonely without you, she said, and immediately wished she hadn't said it out loud, and then found she didn't regret it at all. I'll try not to disappoint the table again, he said, and there was real warmth in it. She brought his usual breakfast without needing to ask, the way she always did now. When he finished, he stood, thanked her, and set down the $10 bill. See you tomorrow, Claire. I'll have your coffee ready. For the first time, both of them walked away from that booth, carrying the same small, unspoken thought. The mornings simply didn't feel complete without the other one in them. The following afternoon, Claire left the diner a little earlier than usual, planning to spend 2 quiet hours at the Sulzer Regional Library before her 6 o'clock class. She stepped out onto the sidewalk on Addison, and traffic slowed to a near stop. A line of black SUVs, 4 of them, pulled to the curb outside the Merchandise Mart Tower 2 blocks down, the kind of building where the lobby alone probably cost more than the entire diner. Curious despite herself, Claire paused on the corner. Men in dark suits stepped out fast, opening the rear door of the lead vehicle with the kind of practiced urgency that meant somebody important was inside. Nathaniel stepped out. He adjusted the cuff of his coat and shook hands with 2 men waiting on the sidewalk, both of whom nodded at him. The way people nod at someone whose approval genuinely matters to their day. That's Nathaniel Weston. A woman standing near Claire said to her friend, phone already raised to take a photo. He's one of the youngest self-made billionaires in the entire Midwest. Weston Capital owns half the buildings on this block. Claire's stomach dropped in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with 100 small details rearranging themselves in her mind all at once. The tailored coats, The watch he never mentioned but that she'd once glimpsed was worth more than her car. The way he said please to everyone. The calm, unhurried way he carried himself, like a man who had never once had to raise his voice to get what he wanted. She watched him disappear through the glass doors of the tower, and by the time she turned to keep walking, her hands were faintly shaking. The quiet man who liked black coffee and rye toast, and 20 minutes of silence before the noise of his own day began, was one of the wealthiest men in the state of Illinois. And he had never once mentioned it. The next morning, as Claire prepared his usual coffee, she found herself smiling at the pot, in a way that had nothing to do with the coffee itself. For the first time in almost a year, she was about to look at Nathaniel Weston through completely different eyes. He arrived at 7:12, exactly on time, exactly as he always did. "Good morning, Mr. Weston." "Good morning, Claire." He read something in her face immediately, the way he seemed to read most things. "You look like you've got something on your mind." She laughed, a little embarrassed. "I do, actually." "Should I be worried? I found out yesterday that you're one of the richest men in Illinois." Something flickered across his face. Not embarrassment exactly. More like the quiet resignation of a man whose secret had simply run its natural course. "So it's out. You never told me. You never asked," he said. "I honestly thought you were just a businessman who liked quiet breakfasts." "I am a businessman who likes quiet breakfasts," he said. That part was never a lie. They both laughed, and something in the tension of the moment eased. When he finished eating, he reached for his wallet, placed the payment on the table, and then, as always, laid down the $10 bill. Claire looked at it for a long moment before picking it up. "Can I finally ask you something?" "You can ask me anything, Claire. You always could." She held his gaze. "Why is it always exactly $10? Not 9, not 11. 311 mornings, and it has never once changed." The easy smile slid off his face slowly, replaced by something quieter and much older. For a few seconds, he simply looked down at the bill resting in her palm. "Because that $10 changed my mother's life," he said finally. Claire didn't say anything. There was something in his voice she had never heard before. Something that wasn't sadness exactly. It was closer to gratitude, the kind that had been carried for a very long time. He looked out the rain-streaked window for a moment. "If you have a few minutes tomorrow morning," he said quietly, "I'll tell you the whole thing." "I'd like that," she said. As he walked toward the door, Claire looked down at the bill in her hand. And for the first time in nearly a year, she understood that it had never simply been a tip. He arrived early the next morning, 7:04 by the clock above the pass-through. Claire had his coffee ready before he'd even taken off his coat. "You remembered," he said. "I told you I'd be here," she said, echoing his own words back to him. He took a slow sip, looked out the window for a moment, and then began. "When I was 8 years old, my father died. A heart attack, sudden, in the parking lot of a hardware store on the south side. My mother had to raise me alone after that, on a factory paycheck that never quite stretched far enough." Claire listened without interrupting. "She worked 2 jobs," he continued. "One of them was waiting tables, at a diner not much different from this one, on 55th Street. Long hours, sore feet. She never once complained where I could hear her. She used to tell me that as long as the two of us had each other, we'd figure the rest out." He paused, and Claire watched something soften in his face at the memory. One winter, when I was 10, things got very hard. We were 3 months behind on rent. There were nights I know now that she skipped dinner entirely, so there'd be enough for me to eat twice. I didn't understand that at the time. I just remember she always said she wasn't hungry. His voice thinned slightly. Then one morning, a customer at that diner left a $10 tip on a check that couldn't have been more than $4. The next morning, the same man came back and left another 10, and the next morning, another. He did it for weeks. My mother never learned his name. She only knew that every single morning, a stranger chose to be kind for absolutely no reason she could point to. Claire felt her eyes go warm and misty. That money bought groceries, he said. It paid down what we owed. It got us through one of the hardest winters of our lives, and my mother never forgot it. Before she passed away, when I was 26, she made me promise her one thing. What was it? Claire asked softly. He smiled, and it was the saddest, warmest smile she'd ever seen on him. She said, "If life ever blesses you, Nathaniel, don't you dare forget what a small act of kindness can mean to somebody who has nothing left." He set another $10 bill on the table gently, the way you'd set down something fragile. So when Weston Capital took off, when the numbers stopped meaning anything real to me anymore, I came back to a diner just like the one she worked in. He looked around the Blue Spoon, at the wobbly ceiling fan, and the cracked vinyl booths. And every morning, I leave $10. Not because it's a lot of money to me now. He looked at her. Because once, a very long time ago, it meant absolutely everything. Claire felt tears slide down her cheeks before she could stop them. She reached across the table and laid her hand gently over his. "Your mother would be so proud of the man you became," she said. For a long moment, Nathaniel Weston, a man who ran board meetings and closed 9-figure deals without ever raising his voice, sat very still in a diner booth and let himself simply be understood by another person. 4 months passed. Claire graduated from her nursing program at Rush University with honors, top of a class of 162 students. True to his word, Nathaniel was there, sitting quietly in the 11th row of folding chairs, clapping harder than anyone else in the room when her name was called. When the ceremony ended, she found him waiting near the exit with a bouquet of white lilies. "You came," she said, unable to keep the smile off her face. "I told you I wasn't going to miss this." She looked down at the flowers. "They're beautiful. They're well-earned," he said. Over the months that followed, something that had started as a quiet, careful friendship slowly deepened into something neither of them rushed to name. Some evenings he picked her up after her shift at the pediatric ward, where she'd landed her first job, and they walked along the lakefront path near Montrose Harbor while the sun went down over the water. Other mornings they still shared breakfast at the same booth in the Blue Spoon, the wobbly-legged table by the window, because neither of them wanted to let go of the place where all of it had started. Then, on a crisp Tuesday morning in October, the kind where the cold has just enough bite to remind, you fall is real, Nathaniel arrived at the diner before it had even officially opened. Claire, letting him in a few minutes early, found him already sitting in their booth. "You beat me here today," she said. "I wanted to," he said. He reached into his coat and set a $10 bill on the table. Claire laughed softly. "I had a feeling you might do that." He stood, walked around to her side of the booth, and looked into her eyes. "That $10 bill reminds me where I came from," he said. "It reminds me that kindness can change the entire direction of a life." He took her hand. "And meeting you reminded me that kindness can also lead you straight to the person you're supposed to spend the rest of your life with." Claire felt her breath catch. "I've shared my mornings with you for almost 2 years now," he said. "I'd like to share every single tomorrow after this one." He lowered himself onto one knee and opened a small velvet box. "Claire Whitmore, will you marry me?" She laughed through tears that had already started falling, nodding before she could even get the word out. "Yes, yes, I will." The diner, half empty at that early hour, erupted into applause. The cook came out from behind the pass-through window, still holding a spatula. Denise pressed both hands over her mouth. And as Nathaniel slid the ring onto her finger, Claire glanced down at the $10 bill, still sitting on the table between them. It had started as a mystery. It had become a promise. And in the end, it had led two people, one who never forgot where he came from, and one who never stopped believing in where she was going, to the one thing neither of them had ever expected to find over eggs and black coffee at 7:12 in the morning. They were married the following June, in a small ceremony in the courtyard of a restored building on the near west side. 60 guests instead of 600, because Nathaniel had insisted gently but firmly that the day belonged to the people who actually mattered to them, and not to a guest list built for photographs. Denise cried through the entire vows and blamed it loudly on allergies. Frank, the elderly regular, whose tray Claire used to carry, sat in the second row in his best suit. A suit Claire later learned Nathaniel had quietly paid to have tailored 2 weeks earlier without telling anyone. Claire kept working at the pediatric unit at Rush, 3 shifts a week, because she had spent too many years chasing that white coat to fold it away the moment her last name changed. Nathaniel never once suggested she should. If anything, he seemed to love her more for refusing to let the money rearrange who she already was. And on the first Monday of every month without fail, the two of them still drove to the Blue Spoon Diner together before the sun was fully up. They sat in the booth with the wobbly leg, the one Claire had fixed with a folded coaster years earlier, and Nathaniel ordered black coffee and rye toast, dry butter on the side, and left, as he always had, a crisp $10 bill tucked beneath the saucer. "Some habits," he told her once, "aren't about the money at all. They're about remembering the exact shape of the moment that saved you, so you never accidentally let yourself forget it." Claire understood that better than almost anyone. She kept the very first $10 bill he'd ever explained to her, the one from that quiet October morning. Pressed flat inside the cover of the nursing textbook she still hadn't been able to throw away. The one with the dog-eared corners, and her own handwriting crowding every margin. It sat there as a reminder that the biggest changes in a life rarely announce themselves. Sometimes they just walk in at 7:12 in the morning, order the same breakfast for 311 days straight, and wait patiently for you to finally ask the right question. If this story meant something to you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe for more real, grounded stories about the quiet ways kindness comes back around. I'd genuinely love to hear from you in the comments. If you were in Claire's shoes, would you have fallen for Nathaniel before you ever found out what he was worth? Or would knowing the truth behind that $10 bill have changed the way you saw him entirely? Thank you for spending this time with me. I'll see you in the next one. Disclaimer: this story is a work of fiction created for entertainment and educational purposes only. All characters, names, businesses, and events depicted are entirely fictional and do not represent any real person, living or dead, or any actual establishment. Any resemblance to real persons, organizations, or events is purely coincidental. This content is intended to explore themes of human dignity, workplace ethics, and social justice through narrative storytelling. It does not make factual claims about any individual, company, or institution.